Now that you know about Darwin and his theory of evolution, and you've had some practice with seeing how natural selection can change a population over time and eventually lead to evolution, let's look at the evidence that scientists use for evolution. We're going to draw from a variety of sources, including the fossil record, and right along with that, the radiometric dating, which is using radioactive isotopes that we learned about in the beginning of the semester to date how old something is. We're going to look at genetic information, the distribution of organisms, not only fossils and with their current counterparts, but also where current species are in relation to one another, and then anatomical and developmental similarities. Hopefully you remember from middle school science that the fossil record isn't perfect. Conditions have to be just right for fossil to form, so we're lucky that we have as many fossils as we do. Soft-bodied things tend not to fossilize well, and that's what life started as soft-bodied organisms. It wasn't until later that hard parts came into existence. So we're very lucky to have what we do. So some different types of fossils. We have mineralization of calcium-rich parts, such as bones and trees. Trees can become petrified trees. This is basically where the organic material is replaced with different minerals and basically turns into rock. We have casts, which is where something is pressed into mud, and then the mud is hardened and preserved. So this isn't parts of an actual organism, it's just the outline. You have carbon imprints, where something that is organic and has a lot of carbon in it sort of leaves an imprint. This is pretty cool. If you'd like to see a real life carbon imprint fossil, just raise your hand. I can bring over a fish that I have. Amber is sap from a tree that hardens. Sometimes things can get caught up in it and preserved. We all know about the famous mosquito from Jurassic Park. And then things can also be frozen and well preserved. So some evidence we're going to look at as well is the distribution of species. So again, hopefully you remember from middle school science, Pangea, meaning pan is all, Gea earth, all earth, because it was all one giant landmass. We can measure movement of the continents because we know about tectonic plates, so we can actually measure movement, so we can extrapolate that data back to where they once were, and they fit like puzzle pieces. Okay. Some evidence for this as well is the distribution of marsupials. So remember, marsupials are mammals who have a pouch. Marsupial mammals are found on every continent on Earth, meaning that they were once widespread, which would make sense during Pangea when they can walk all over the place and travel. As Pangea broke up into the continents, they became isolated on those continents. On most of them, there were predators that wiped out most marsupials. But Australia was a safe place where they didn't have a lot of predators. And so now today, most of them are in Australia. Want to take a guess as to what North America's only native marsupial is? The possum. The possum is our only native one. Here are some Australian marsupials. You have the wombat and the kangaroo. Most people know about those two. You got the scary guy, the Tasmanian wolf, sugar gliders, which are popular in the pet trade, and then their native cat. We have feral cats running around. They got these little marsupials. That is their native cat. Geographic isolation can lead to speciation. So if a population gets separated by a barrier, whether it is natural, such as the Grand Canyon forming, or Pangea breaking up, or a river flowing, or it could be man-made nowadays, like building a dam or building a giant 8-lane highway separating up forest patches. When that population gets separated, they can no longer interbreed, so they can no longer exchange genetic material. So over time, in their own little environment, natural selection can act on them differently. They have different challenges to face. So over time, as their genetics become more and more and more different, they can become so different that they can no longer interbreed. And so they are new species. So this is speciation. We learned about this a little bit yesterday in one of our amoeba sister videos. This is one of my favorite examples of evolutionary evidence, the homologous structures. So homologous structures are body parts in different organisms that are used in different ways, but they're made of the same stuff. So remember, homo means same, homologous means made of the same stuff, okay? It's made out of the same bones, the same muscles, the same blood vessels, the same nerves. They develop the same way in the embryo. This is so cool. We all come from the same place, so it's all made out of the same stuff. It just looks a little bit different because natural selection acted differently on the different organisms. So they're made of the same stuff. They're just shaped a little bit different. Here's the most famous homologous structure picture. You will probably see it on the EOC because they love this picture. This is a human arm, a cat forelimb, a whale flipper, and a bat wing. They are all used to do very different things, but they're made of the same stuff. Check it. Here's the humerus of the human, humerus of the cat, humerus of the whale, humerus of the bat. Same bone, shaped a little bit differently, but we can see how it would be easy for natural selection to slowly change these, making this one shorter, this one smaller because bats are so tiny. Okay, this one more curved because they walk on 4 limbs. Radius and ulna, radius and ulna, radius and ulna, radius and ulna. Little yellow ones here, these are your wrist bones, those are your metacarpals. All of them have some. These long ones here, these are your phalanges, your fingers, your carpals, okay? We all got them because we all come from the same place. They're just shaped a little bit differently because natural selection acted differently on us. This is so cool. Okay. Here is a modern day armadillo and showing his ancient ancestor, the Clyptodont. You can see how they are definitely related. They share a lot of these similar traits. Another evidence is a vestigial structure. A vestigial structure is something that is found in a modern day organism that serves absolutely no purpose. It does nothing for the organism. So why do we have it? Well, because it's a leftover from our evolutionary ancestor. It was useful to our ancestor, but over time, as natural selection acted on us, it wasn't necessary for us to need that structure anymore. And so our body stopped focusing on it and stopped coding for it. Can you think of an example of a vestigial structure? Most people come up with the human tailbone. We don't have a tail, so why a tailbone? And the appendix. Some other examples would include wings in ostriches. They can't fly. Why do they have wings? Well, because their ancestors could fly. How about whales having a pelvis? Your pelvic bone is to hold your legs in place. Whales don't have legs, but their ancestors did. Whales come from land mammals that went back into the ocean. Same thing with snakes. They will have a pelvis sometimes, even though they have no legs, because their ancestors had legs. Here's another one of my favorites, comparative embryology. This is really cool. So this is comparing the embryos of different species. And early on in development, all embryos of animals look the same. You can't tell the difference. And that's because we all come from the same place. It isn't until later on in development that you start seeing differences. Check it. Okay, up here, we have the embryos of a fish, a salamander, a tortoise, a chick, a rabbit, and a human. Okay? They all look really similar. Yeah, there are some small differences, but remember, even within human embryos, there's going to be a lot of variation. Some human embryos are going to look exactly like this. Some are going to look exactly like this. Some are going to look exactly like this. There's variation. But look how similar they are. Even professionals who do nothing but stare at embryos all day can't tell you what species one belongs to. Now, give it time. Let the organism develop a little bit. Check out the fish and the salamander. They still look really similar because they're closely related. But these 4 look very different from those 2, okay? But they still look really similar to each other because they're closely related in comparison. You're starting to see the little leg nubs, the little arm nubs coming in. Give it more time, okay? Fish and salamander are looking pretty distinct now because they're really far along in their development. Check out the tortoise and the chick. They look super similar because they're super related. They're really closely related. The rabbit and the human, really closely related. This is so cool to me, because we all start out looking the same because we all come from the same place. It isn't until later in development, when our species-specific genes start to kick in, that we start to look so different from one another. That's really cool. More recently, we've been able to do biochemical evidence now that we've developed the technology to be able to study DNA and RNA, the nucleotide code, proteins, and amino acid codes. The more similar these codes are, the more similar or the more closely related the 2 species are. This is really good evidence because it is it is the base of what you are. Your DNA is who you are. So the more similar your DNA to something else, the more closely related. It's pretty cool to see how closely related some things are. Okay? And the last thing that we need to talk about is the two different theories of how evolution occurs. There's gradualism, which says that organisms are constantly, gradually changing small, small, small. And that is represented by these smooth, curving lines to represent that it is gradually, constantly changing. And the other one is punctuated equilibrium, which states that organisms stay the same, stay the same, stay the same, stay the same, and then something happens, something catastrophic, and then there's rapid change, rapid evolution, and then stay the same, stay the same, stay the same, and then rapid evolution, okay? That's punctuated equilibrium. So make sure you can tell the difference between these two and like be able to say, oh, this is smooth, so that's gradualism. Oh, this is choppy looking, so that's punctuated equilibrium. But know that in real life, it's actually a mixture of these two. Organisms are showing gradualism. They are gradually, constantly changing. But if something catastrophic happens or the environment changes, you will have a period of punctuated equilibrium. And then it'll go back to gradualism, and then you'll have a period of punctuated equilibrium. Okay?